Why should we think about sociology as being about theory? To begin with, it's important to realise that it's actually impossible to escape from theorising. We do it all the time to make sense of the complexity of social organisation, something we're provoked to do whenever our tried and trusted recipes for living fail us. This is why the most productive periods in social thought are those in which taken for granted assumptions are particularly unstable, when for any number of reasons there's no longer a widely shared consensus about how society should be organised. Really, there's no such thing as non-theoretical, purely empirical research in the social sciences. Theory is just another word for thought, for how we make sense of and organise what we see, how we draw conclusions and how we speak. So it matters a lot which theory we start with and whether we're even conscious of the theory we're using. Our choice of theory has a decisive impact on what we'll count as facts, evidence and what we'll recognise as valid conclusions and inferences. If a researcher chooses not to talk about their theoretical orientation, all this means is that it's buried deep within their definition of their research problem, their identification of the issues worth paying attention to, their methodology and the kinds of conclusions they regard as plausible and persuasive. You can have enormous fun, if you're so inclined, digging out the theoretical presumptions of work produced by social researchers who say nothing about their theoretical orientation. So, what is a sociological theory? There's lots of ways to answer this question, but to begin with, it's a conceptual framework organised around a particular set of concepts and ideas, as well as a set of arguments around how those concepts and ideas relate to each other. Much of your study in sociology is about becoming familiar with the language of sociology and, pushing that analogy a bit further, the different dialects that are spoken. That's more or less what different theories are. One of the main reasons it's useful to pay some detailed attention to the possible theoretical approaches to sociology is that they point us towards different aspects of social life in order to explain the form that social relationships take. The theorists that we'll look at identify ways that we can analyse social life, and we often have these ways of thinking buried deep in our understanding of the social world without thinking about it. They become ways in which we unthinkingly explain the world as if we made it up ourselves, becoming part of our culture and our everyday life, available for all to use in explaining, for example, poverty, mental illness, gender behaviour or crime. Next question, why do sociologists still think about some writers that get characterised as classical? They're long dead, so much has been written since, and surely things just get better all the time. Why read something written in 1895 when you can read something on the same topic written in 2015? There are a lot of different responses to this question, and one would be that there was something particular about this historical period, the late 19th and early 20th century, that enabled these thinkers to see with particular clarity what kind of new society was emerging, a particularly modern society with a structure and dynamics that we're still living with today, even though it's changed enormously. In many respects, they had a particularly clear insight into modern social life because they could still remember what kind of society came before, and that remains useful today. But I'd actually like to sidestep that for the time being and make the claim that looking at the early sociological thinkers in detail is a useful way to engage with the problem of perspectives in sociological thought. If you're using different conceptual frameworks, different bodies of terms and concepts that link together in their own particular way, and that's what any theorist's work involves, then you'll see different things. You'll notice different things about the world and you'll emphasise different things. If you can grasp these four theorists, Durkheim, Marx, Weber and Simmel, you'll have a very solid foundation for understanding any sociological theory at all. They're the foundations upon which everything that's been said in sociology since has been built. It's also true that all the theoretical work that's been done since is extremely interesting in its own right, and lots of new concepts and forms of analysis have been developed after these sociologists. More than that, there are many earlier thinkers that also deserve attention. The obvious people we want you to look at, if you have the time, are Mandeville, Adam Smith, de Tocqueville, Auguste Comte and Herbert Spencer. But if you're short for time, and just as a starting point, these four theorists give you a great foundation. All the later theorists you'll encounter, even if they speak the language of sociology in a dialect that seems quite distant from these four thinkers, will be drawing on central aspects of their way of thinking about society and social change in one way or another. By becoming familiar with their ideas and arguments, you'll be well placed to grasp any new theoretical perspectives you encounter much more quickly, as you recognise what seems to be an entirely new way of thinking about the social world as essentially a variation on one or more of the themes outlined by one or more of these four sociologists. Finally, I'd like to emphasize the concept of translation. You should always try and express the ideas and arguments you're encountering in ways that are different from what you've actually read, either in your own words or using a vocabulary you might have learned somewhere else. So if Marx says the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles, don't remain caught in his words. Try and capture the underlying idea in a different way, perhaps adding some nuances. You could translate this as something like, society's changed a lot, but when you look at the history of social life closely, it's really always organised around conflicts between groups of people that should be seen as distinct classes. So the history of society is essentially the history of the different forms taken by those class struggles. Everything else gets organised around class struggle. Something like that. If you do that, sociological theory will open up all sorts of new doors in the way you think about the world around you, and there's a good chance you'll enjoy it enormously. In summary, I talked about how we really draw on some theory or other all the time. It's not possible to do non-theoretical research. Second, thinking about theory is a good way to understand the concept of different sociological perspectives or standpoints. Third, if you come to a good understanding of Marx, Weber, Durkheim and Simmel, you'll find it much easier to deal with most sociological theory written since. Fourth, it's important to be able to translate sociological theory into your own words to grasp the underlying idea or argument.